Hey everybody, welcome back to our channel. I want to start off by saying that I filmed a proper intro to this video in the Jeep, but I didn't realize my phone was plugged into the Jeep to charge and none of the audio recorded. So we're just going to jump right into the footage. Today we are parked at Elizabeth Park, which is near Uptown Charlotte, North Carolina. It's going to be a beautiful day, the warmest day we've had in weeks. It's only about 48 degrees right now, but it's supposed to get up to a sunny 52 here within the next hour, and I am really excited for today's adventure. Ever since I first found out about the Charlotte Trail of History, I have wanted to bring the vlog here. We are going to follow the route along the Little Sugar Creek Greenway Walk for a little over a mile and check out some statues dedicated to important people who helped develop Charlotte into the beautiful city that it is today. Currently, there are 11 statues along the trail, although there are plans to add more important figures to the walk in the near future. The Trail of History is a privately funded nonprofit which raises funds and selects nationally recognized bronze sculpturists to install life-size or larger-than-life-size statues. From the statues' locations, you can see the city which these people helped to create. This is one of the most creative projects in the entire United States, as no other project quite like it exists in other cities. This first bronze statue that we are approaching is called Thomas Sprat and King Haigler. It was created by Chas Fagan and erected in 2014. Prior to European contact, native Catawba Indians inhabited most of the Piedmont regions of North and South Carolina and Southern Virginia. Chief Haigler was one of the greatest chiefs of the Catawbas, presiding over his tribe from 1749 until 1763. In the 1750s, Scotch-Irish settlers began flooding into the Catawba territory. In 1753, a man named Thomas Sprat was among the earliest settlers in this part of the Carolinas and was the first European to settle in what is today known as Mecklenburg County. Sprat's father had purchased land on 12 Mile Creek in Fort Mill, South Carolina in 1750, and later added on 2 plantations in Anson and Mecklenburg counties. Thomas Sprat began farming on his father's land and eventually inherited the plantations on his father's death. Although the lands had originally been purchased from North Carolina, they were later part of a 225 square miles of land that North Carolina gave to the Catawba Indians in 1763. However, the Catawbas decided to become part of the state of South Carolina, and for many years, Sprat and his descendants continued to lease and farm thousands of acres of farmland from the Catawbas. Thomas Sprat became a good friend and ally with the Catawbas, and he assisted the negotiations of leasing Indian lands to other Europeans. King Haigler, chief of the Catawba, and Thomas Sprat are recognized here together in this statue for their navigation of the complex realities and relationships among the Catawba and the early European settlers to the Carolina backcountry. King Haigler and Sprat became economic and military allies. Catawba warriors protected Sprat and the other settlers from invading Cherokees, and Sprat fought alongside the Catawba braves against their blood enemies, the Shawnees. Sprat also ensured that European trade goods were supplied to the Catawbas. British colonial authorities recognized Haigler as King of the Catawbas. Haigler was a skilled diplomat, and he negotiated several treaties for the safety and protection of his people. He allied with the European settlers in the disputed regions between North and South Carolina, and his legacy impacted the development of Charlotte, Fort Mill, and Camden, South Carolina, as well as helped to shape the border between the 2 Carolina states. The 1760s was a time of great trouble for the Catawbas. In addition to the European settlers moving into the backcountry of the Carolinas, life was changing for the original inhabitants. The Shawnees and other northern Indian tribes, as well as the Cherokees, were attacking, raiding, and killing the Catawbas. King Haigler had chosen to align himself with the new settlers and proved himself to be a great friend of the Europeans. Thomas Sprat chose to participate with the Catawbas in a battle just before the American Revolution near where the Ohio and Kanawha rivers meet at Point Pleasant in present-day West Virginia. He was given the nickname Kanawha when he defended his friends. The Shawnees and their allies from Virginia and the Carolinas were defeated, but King Haigler was ambushed and killed during the battle. Thomas Spratt remained a friend and an agent for the Catawba Indians for the rest of his life, remaining fast friends with the chiefs and their people. Haigler's braves fought with Spratt alongside the English against the French and Indians. Later, when Spratt went on to become an officer in the American Army and fought against Lord Cornwallis when he invaded North Carolina, Haigler's braves took part with him on the American side in our Revolution. Today, the Catawba Nation survives within its ancient homeland near present-day Rock Hill, South Carolina, only a few miles outside of Charlotte. The Catawbas are one of the few native nations that still occupy their original territory since European contact. The next statue we are approaching is dedicated to Dr. Annie Alexander, who blazed a new path for the future of women when she became the first licensed woman to practice medicine in North Carolina in 1885. Dr. Alexander, known affectionately as Dr. Annie, was born during the final year of the Civil War and lived during a time when the idea of any woman becoming a doctor horrified most people, as it went against the cultural and societal norms of the 19th century. She received her early education from her father, Dr. John Brevard Alexander, and a tutor who prepared her for her entrance into medical school. Her inspiration to become a doctor came from watching a female patient die because she refused to receive medical care from a male physician. Dr. Alexander attended and graduated from the Philadelphia Female College in 1884. For a while, she taught anatomy at Baltimore Children's Hospital, but she returned to Mecklenburg County to convalesce after contracting tuberculosis. In 1885, she opened a practice in her own home on North Tryon Street, where she also performed operations. She began giving public lectures on the importance of hygiene and maintaining a proper diet. She traveled across the county to see her patients in a horse and buggy until she was able to purchase a car. Dr. Annie was active in the Charlotte Women's Club, which provided social services to the poor. She also provided free medical care and advice to mothers, children, and other types of caregivers. She was a founding member of the Mecklenburg Medical Society, and she also joined the Southern Women's Medical Association. When World War I broke out, she was given a commission as lieutenant and appointed to the position of assistant surgeon. She oversaw a project to prevent the transmission of communicable diseases in schools from spreading into Camp Green, a 6,000-acre training camp that included a hospital on 60 acres of land. At its peak, Camp Green was training more soldiers than the physical population of Charlotte, and prevention of an outbreak of communicable disease was imperative. Throughout her career, Dr. Alexander maintained a keen interest in the health of school children, and she participated in programs that offered free examinations and treatment for children and their mothers, especially those living in mill villages. She served as the physician to the YWCA and to the Presbyterian College for Women, today known as Queen's University. She also wrote and presented a number of medical papers to various professional organizations. Unfortunately, in 1929, after remaining in the home of a patient who needed special care, Dr. Annie contracted pneumonia and died on October 15th. She was survived by her adopted son, Robert Alexander, as well as siblings, nieces, and nephews. She is buried in the Elmwood Cemetery, and if you check out my video from October where we toured that cemetery, I showed her gravestone and talked even more about her life. She was fondly remembered by her patients and colleagues and her lifetime devotion of service to others. If you were here for the series of veterans videos that I did in the month of November, you'll remember that I did an entire video dedicated to Lunice McGlowan, and this is probably my favorite statue along this trail. Lunice McGlowan was one of America's most beloved songwriters and jazz pianists, and I'm so proud that we get to claim him as one of our own here in Charlotte. McGlowan was born in the small town of Ayden, North Carolina, and as a young child was enthralled by the big band sound that was permeating across the airwaves in the 1940s. He learned to play piano from the organist at his family's church. After graduating from East Carolina University, he enrolled in the military and was assigned to the Army Air Force, where he became an official pianist. This is where his talents for performing and collaborating with other musicians really blossomed. After World War II ended, McGlowan got married in 1945 to Nan Lovelace, and they had 3 children, Reeves, Fan, and Laurie. He began a career involved with broadcasting in Charlotte and worked as the music director for WBT, the AM radio station, and WBTV, a CBS affiliate. In addition to his radio work, he formed a trio for club and concert engagements that appeared across the United States, including 3 times in Carnegie Hall and also in Japan, China, Singapore, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom. He accompanied several legendary singers, including Helen O'Connell and Judy Garland, and he was the musical director for Mabel Mercer and Eileen Farrell. In 1978, Lunis joined longtime collaborator and friend Alec Wilder to host American Popular Song for South Carolina's ETV Radio, which received a Peabody Award. He donated the recordings of this program to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library. Among the songs Lunis wrote with Wilder include Blackberry Winter, Be a Child, and While We're Young. He also wrote both the music and the lyrics for Songbird. With Wilder, he also wrote the music and lyrics for the former amusement park called the Land of Oz in Beech Mountain, North Carolina. For Charlotte, Lunis wrote the music for Legette Blythe's outdoor drama called The Hornet's Nest, which was staged in 1968 at a new amphitheater at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. The 2 principal songs are This Is the Day and What Will the World Be Like? In 1980, Lunis's longtime friend Frank Sinatra recorded 2 songs by McGlowan and Wilder, South to a Warmer Place and A Long Night. In 1985, Lunis was commissioned alongside Charles Kuralt to write a piece of music to celebrate North Carolina's 400th birthday. The result was North Carolina Is My Home, a symphonic work with narration and vocals that became a recording, a public TV broadcast, and a book. McGlowan was inducted into the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame in 1999. Before his death from lymphoma in 2002, a performing arts center in Charlotte was renamed in his honor, the McGlowan Theater. His ashes are in the Carmel Presbyterian Church Columbarium, where he served as the church's music director for many years. Another statue that you might recognize if you were here for the Veterans Series in November is this beautiful one of Captain James Jack. I was so interested in his story that I did a whole video just on him. This bronze is by Chaz Fagan and was erected in 2010, and boy does it catch eyeballs from the intersection. I think this is probably the most beautiful statue in this entire history walk. North Carolina was ready for independence from our British overlords a full year before the Declaration of Independence was signed. On May 19, 1775, a rider delivered news to what was then known as Charlottetown of a massacre of colonists by the British at the battles of Lexington and Concord. Already oppressed and burdened by the unjust laws of King George III, an infuriated band of local patriots met together throughout the night and into the morning of May the 20th, drafting a document known as Mecklenburg's Original Declaration of Independence. On May 31st, they met again through the night to draft a document which became known as the Mecklenburg Resolves, which outlined exactly how they planned to self-govern once free. These documents were highly treasonous, as they declared that the actions of the Crown were intolerable, and that Charlottetown and the entire Mecklenburg County no longer considered themselves under British rule. A young tavern owner named Captain James Jack volunteered to take these powerful, treasonous documents on the arduous journey from Charlotte to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia, a journey of nearly 560 miles. He knew full well that if he were caught, he would immediately be hanged. He chose to risk his livelihood, his property, his family's safety and well-being, and his very life to transport these documents. Riding over 30 miles a day, he was able to slip past British regulars and Tory spies, and he arrived in Philadelphia, demanding the Mecklenburg County Declaration of Freedom be read into the record. Jack later stated that he served in the Revolutionary War from the commencement to the close. He became a captain in the Mecklenburg militia, and he is said to have been so popular his company begged him not to accept any promotions. When Lord Cornwallis occupied Charlotte in 1780, British troops dragged Jack's ailing father from his bed and burned the family home to the ground. But Captain Jack has become a heroic figure in Charlotte Mecklenburg's history as a significant symbol of the community that risked everything for the rights and protections that we take for granted today. This bronze statue by Jane de Decker was erected in 2018 and is here to memorialize the Thompson Orphanage and Training Institute that was founded on this spot in 1886. The orphanage was named for Lewis Thompson, whose wife Margaret was a financial contributor and donated most of the land for the campus. The first superintendent of the orphanage was Edwin Augustus Osborne, who I believe is the adult in this statue. Osborne was a descendant of original settlers of Mecklenburg County and served as a soldier in the Civil War. He worked as a lawyer and county clerk before becoming an Episcopalian minister and subsequently the superintendent at Thompson, a position he held until 1898. When first founded, this Thompson Institute was on the outskirts of the city of Charlotte, and it took in orphans from all across North Carolina, both children whose parents had died and also those whose mothers and fathers could not care for them due to poverty or illness. The 40-acre campus included a fully functioning farm, and the children's daily chores included tending the vegetable garden and milking the cows. Today, many older Charlotteans have fond childhood recollections of their families purchasing milk from the orphanage. By 1956, the Thompson Orphanage was surrounded by the city, and some of its land had been taken away to build Independence Boulevard and Pearl Street Park. Most of the orphanage property was leased to the Rouse Company for construction of the first enclosed shopping mall in the South. In 1970, Thompson moved to a new campus on St. Peter's Lane in Matthews and changed its name to the Thompson Children's Home. However, it has evolved from its early beginnings into an organization operating across the Carolinas. Today, it is a leading provider of clinical and prevention services for children and families. At each of its current locations, it provides comprehensive education, treatment, and care for children who are in need. At its most intensive level, Thompson helps to heal children who have been severely abused or neglected and tries to provide them with the support and services they need until they are in a secure and stable, loving home. Here is a statue of Philip Lance Van Every, and you might remember him from the video I did showing famous graves in the Elmwood Cemetery here in Charlotte. Van Every was a Charlotte native and the son and grandson of the founders of Lance Packing Company. He joined the family business as a salesman when annual sales were below $1 million. After his father's death in 1943, 29-year-old Philip became president and CEO, and sales at that time were around $9 million. Philip Van Every chose to seek advice from the Baltimore-based spice moguls, McCormick & Company. He studied their multiple management program and implemented a similar version of his own at the Lance Company, which ended up becoming very successful. He also started a 100% company-funded employee pension fund. His office door was always open, and employees were always free to enter at any time to express their opinions and ideas. Under Phil's leadership, the company rapidly grew from a small family-owned operation into a nationally recognized public company. During the 1950s, Phil entered into public service and quickly garnered a reputation for political honesty. He served as mayor pro temp from 1951 to 1953 on the Charlotte City Council, and then as the elected Charlotte mayor for 2 terms from 1953 to 1957. During his tenure, he presided over the completion of Independence Boulevard, an expansion of the Memorial Hospital, the building of the Park Road Shopping Center and Ovens Auditorium Coliseum Complex, and he launched the fundraising campaign for the building of the Dowd YMCA. In 1961, he oversaw the building of a new expansion plant for his company on South Boulevard and opened that facility in 1962. I have known many people over the years who worked there. Lance snacks are still made there to this day. At his retirement in 1973, the company had 4,500 employees in 34 states and was making $80 million in annual sales. Phil's passion for the Carolinas and civic responsibility inspired him to establish the Philip L. Van Every Foundation, which works to fulfill his legacy and steward the family Lance Incorporated's history. He was inducted posthumously into the North Carolina Business Hall of Fame in 1992. Next here is a statue of William Henry Belk, sculpted by Antonio Tobias Mendez. Belk is a very well-known name here in the South. We all shop at the Belk department stores in our local shopping malls. If you're from an area of the country that doesn't have a Belk's, you could compare it to a Macy's, JCPenney, Elder Beerman, Dillard's, etc. William Henry Belk was born in Lancaster, South Carolina, but his family moved to Monroe, North Carolina, just a few miles southeast of Charlotte, after his father was killed by Union troops during the American Civil War. As a young boy, he worked at a dry goods store in Monroe and eventually became the manager of that store in 1877. But Belk had much bigger dreams than working for somebody else and eventually decided to open up stores of his own. He saw that the South presented an opportunity for large department stores and that those stores could join together to gain price concessions from the major manufacturers. Belk really pioneered the concept of inventive partnerships with retail stores across the South. He convinced his brother to join in business with him, and together they opened stores in Chester and Union, South Carolina. In 1885, they opened their first store in Charlotte, North Carolina, which they called the Belk Brothers Company. Belk's company provided management expertise and supplied each stores with items from the company warehouses in Charlotte. Many of the stores in this chain had the Belk name hyphenated with another name to reflect a partnership. The stores prospered by appealing to residents of the local towns as well as farmers from the surrounding areas. In addition to his new business methods, Belk's store was innovative in its advertising and personal customer service. Belk became an innovator in retail methods and business partnerships, and he led the Charlotte-based Belk stores to become one of the leading retail enterprises in the Southeast by the mid-20th century. Belk was also prominent in the community as he supported numerous religious, civic, educational, and philanthropic organizations, including Presbyterian churches, the Montreat Retreat Association, Davidson College, Queens College, Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte, Presbyterian Junior College in Maxton, North Carolina, the Presbyterian Orphans Home at Berrien Springs, North Carolina, and even the Sarah Walkup Hospital in China. He served on the Board of School Commissioners in Charlotte and participated in the planning of Central High School. Belk and his wife Mary resided in Charlotte at the site of the current Novant Hospital, formerly known as Presbyterian Hospital, where they raised 5 sons. He is buried in Elmwood Cemetery, and I talked much more about his life and legacy and showed his grave monument in the Elmwood Cemetery video that I put out last October. This is a bronze statue of Thaddeus Lincoln Tate, a prominent African-American businessman and civic leader in Charlotte, by Ed Dwight. It was erected in 2015. If you watched my October video on the Elmwood Cemetery, I showed where he is buried also, but I've learned a little bit more about him since then. Thaddeus Lincoln Tate was born in 1865 and moved into Charlotte in 1877 as a young child. From the 1890s until the 1940s, he operated the Uptown Barber Shop in the Central Hotel at Trade and Tryon Streets in Charlotte, which was a white community. At that time in history, most barbers in the white communities of the South were African Americans, and barbers often played a really important role as representatives of the black communities. Tate's customers included prominent Charlotte civic leaders such as Governor Cameron Morrison, department store owners William Henry Belk and J.B. Ivey, and the neighborhood builder and developer Edward Dilworth Latta. Thad Tate built an elegant Victorian-style brick house in uptown Charlotte in the 1880s in what was then an integrated neighborhood. He and his wife raised 10 children together and were affectionately called by their friends the Dozen family. Tate rose to become a prominent African-American businessman and civic leader by making significant contributions to the Charlotte community in the early to mid-20th century. He helped to found the Grace AME Zion Church built in 1886 on South Brevard Street. The church played a huge role in the African-American community in Charlotte at the time. Tate used his friendships with local white leaders to press for improvements to services for African Americans. He helped found the Brevard Street branch of the public library, which opened in 1904 as the first free branch of the public library open to African Americans in the South. Tate also helped found a branch of the YMCA for African Americans and the Morrison Training School for Youths in Hoffman, North Carolina. Along with other African American leaders, Tate created the Afro-American Mutual Insurance Company that operated from 1907 to 1927. The company hired African Americans and catered to people largely ignored by the white-owned companies. He was the director of the investment company that built the Mecklenburg Investment Company building in 1922, the first office building in Charlotte for African American businesses and professions. The first floor included a pharmacy. The second floor held offices for African American doctors and lawyers, and the third floor was reserved as a meeting hall for African American Masonic lodges. Julius Levon Chambers was born in 1936 in the little town of Mount Gilead, North Carolina, and I'm mentioning that because I have family that lives there. He was an American lawyer, civil rights leader, and educator. His desire to pursue a career in law was fueled by a discrimination incident when his father's auto repair business became the target of racial injustice in 1948. He entered the law profession after earning a law degree from Columbia University in order to help end segregation and racial discrimination. In 1963, Mr. Chambers served as the first intern with the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. In 1964, he opened his law practice in Charlotte, which eventually became the first integrated law firm in North Carolina. The firm, founded with partners James E. Ferguson and Adam Stein, is credited with influencing more landmark state and federal legislation in school desegregation, employment, and voting rights than any other firm in the United States. Together with lawyers from the Legal Defense and Education Fund, they helped shape civil rights law by winning benchmark United States Supreme Court rulings, such as the famous decision of Swan versus Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education in 1971 that led to federally mandated busing, which helped to integrate public schools across the country. Chambers and his team also won in 2 of the Supreme Court's most monumental Title VII employment discrimination decisions, Briggs versus Duke Power Company in 1971 and Albemarle Paper Company versus Moody in 1974. Several times, the firm's efforts were met with violence from white supremacists. While Mr. Chambers was away at a speaking engagement in January 1965 in New Bern, North Carolina, his car was destroyed by a bomb. On November 22, 1965, in the midst of the first hearings of the Swan school bus case, his home was bombed. Then in 1971, the firm's Charlotte law office was firebombed. Mr. Chambers left his firm in 1984 to become Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Under his leadership, the organization became the first line of defense against the political assault on civil rights legislation and affirmed action programs. He was devoted to education, and he returned to his alma mater, North Carolina Central University, to serve as chancellor for 8 years from 1993 to 2001. After retirement from NCCU in 2001, Mr. Chambers re-entered private practice with the firm he had started, which is today known as Ferguson, Chambers & Sumter, PA. In 2002, he became the director of the UNC Center for Civil Rights in the University of North Carolina School of Law. He and his wife raised 2 children. He died in 2013 at the age of 76. He is memorialized here in this bronze statue by Ed Hamilton that was erected in 2021. This is a bronze statue of James B. Duke by J. Brett Grill that was erected in 2015. Born in 1856, James Buchanan Duke was one of the 20th century's greatest industrialists and philanthropists. James Duke was born on a humble tobacco farm in Durham, North Carolina. Along with his father and brother, Duke turned their company, W. Duke Sons & Co., into a major tobacco industry by shifting from the tedious hand-rolled cigarette process into mechanized mass production. By 1904, through the merging with 5 of the world's largest cigarette producers, the Duke's Tobacco Company was ranked among the largest corporations in the world. James Duke invested into banking, textiles, and the railroad industry. His railways, Piedmont and Northern Line, known as the Great Electric System of the South, helped the textile industry really boom. He understood that to develop manufacturing in the South, the region would require significant infrastructure, including the use of the new technology known as hydroelectric power. Duke's vision for electrifying the Carolinas led him to acquire land and water rights along the Catawba River in the early 1900s. His engineers then dammed the rivers to create Lake Wylie, Lake Norman, and other lakes, and to harness the power. He founded the Charlotte-based Southern Power Company, which became the utility giant known as Duke Energy, one of the largest energy companies in the United States. James Duke's philanthropy reflected his ability to build on a grand scale. In 1924, working from his home in Charlotte, which is today the site of the Duke Mansion in the Myers Park neighborhood, he established the Duke Endowment, one of the largest private foundations in the United States. Early funding from the endowment transformed the small Trinity College into Duke University. To this day, the Duke Endowment continues to assist Duke, Davidson College, Furman University, and Johnson C. Smith University, as well as support rural churches, healthcare, and children's services throughout the Carolinas. When Mr. Duke's attorney announced the trust to newspaper reporters, one observer wrote that a hushed silence fell upon the crowd as the magnitude of the gifts began to dawn on them. Only 10 months after signing his indenture of trust, James Duke died from a blood illness. After his funeral in Durham in 1925, newspapers across the country eulogized one of the last log cabin successes of American life. Jane Renwick Smedberg Wilkes was born in 1827 in New York City, but moved to Charlotte shortly after her marriage to John Wilkes in 1954. She is memorialized here in this statue by Wendy Ross that was erected in 2014. Jane Wilkes volunteered in Charlotte during the American Civil War, when many Confederate wounded were sent to the Charlotte Confederate Camp hospitals. This experience convinced her of the need for a permanent hospital, and in 1875 she became very active in leading the effort to build Charlotte's first 2 civilian hospitals. As president and later secretary of the Church Aid Society of St. Peter's Protestant Episcopal Church, she worked tirelessly to raise funds and establish these Charlotte hospitals. The Charlotte Home and Hospital of St. Peter's Episcopal Church began serving the white community in 1876 and was the first civilian hospital in North Carolina. At first, it operated out of 2 rented rooms in a house, but later moved to its own building. Jane also helped found the Good Samaritan Hospital in 1882 in a 4-room house that also later received its own building in 1888. This was the first hospital dedicated to the care of African Americans in North Carolina and one of the first in the United States. Jane served on the boards of both St. Peter's and Good Samaritan hospitals, and she was the secretary and treasurer of St. Peter's for 29 years. These 2 hospitals were the forerunners of the modern-day Atrium Health, headquartered in Charlotte. For the remainder of her life, Jane devoted untold hours to raising funds to support her hospitals. She was also involved in the founding of Charlotte's first orphanage, the Thompson Children's Home that we talked about earlier. At her funeral in 1913, so many people came to honor her that the interior as well as the grounds of St. Peter's were covered with people and flowers. Well, that is going to end the Charlotte Trail of History. This covers all 11 statues that are standing as of February 2025, although I think there are more statues coming in the future. I am really excited about plans I saw in the History Walk brochure for statues to honor George and Marie Davis, who were involved with the Rosenwald Project and bringing public education to the Black communities in the mid-20th century, and also a statue coming to honor Romare Bearden, an artist that Charlotte is proud to claim as one of our own. I had a really fun time walking in this lovely weather and admiring not only these amazing sculptures, but also enjoying the beautiful Charlotte skyline. I am so proud to call this city home, and it is my honor and pleasure to be able to learn about such incredible humans that helped to sculpt Charlotte and make it the wonderful place that it is to live today.